So hi, thank you. Great to join everybody again today on today's Let's Talk Money webinar. My name's Kay Price and I am a financial wellbeing planner. I run a business called KP Financial Wellbeing and I'm really passionate about supporting women with their financial futures. So when Gulnaz and Ray, when you asked me to be involved in this project, I was kind of really proud because it sits really closely to what I'm about. I have had experience with dealing with some clients that have suffered financial abuse. So I do have some experience about that and kind of how I help my clients through that process. It's obviously a really scary time and it's a really unknown time, and you probably will feel really alone during that period of time because actually to leave a relationship where that abuse is happening takes a lot of bravery in the first place. So, if you've been in that situation, well done for getting to this point and then trying to get some support from, the panel here and the things that we're doing to try and support everybody on their journeys. I think what's really important when you come out of an abusive relationship in terms of financial and obviously domestic abuse is, first of all, keeping yourself safe and your children safe and finding somewhere to live. If you don't already have somewhere to live, then there's lots of places you can go to for support around housing support. There are lots of shelters you can go to, lots of charities that you can go to that can really help you stay safe in that short-term situation. I was recently at a refuge where I've supported some women who are going through this situation. And one of the things that I did with them while I was there was talk about budget planning, because actually what a lot of women who have been in that situation have found is that their financial independence has been taken away. So you've not been in control of your own money, for example. You've been under the control of somebody who hasn't let you spend money or asks what you're spending money on, or is in control of your bank account, not giving you access to money. And obviously, if you've been in that situation for a long time, you may have got out of the habit of managing your finances properly and managing your money well. So I think one of the really important things you should look to do when you find yourself in that situation is, first of all, work out what benefits you're entitled to if you don't work. So find out what you can get from Universal Credit, for example. So you would go to maybe the benefits office and find out what you can claim to help you through that short period of time. Obviously, if you're working, it's different. Obviously, please let your employer know that you're going through a difficult situation, probably financially and personally. But if you know what your income is and you know what that looks like, then the best thing you can do then is sit down and work out what you need to survive on a week by week basis in the short term. How much you need to feed yourself and your children, how much you need to stay with a roof over your head. And look for all the essential things that you need. It does the luxuries and the extra things that we'd like in life can wait, can't they? As long as you can sleep warmly at night with your children safe, if you have children, or yourself safe, and you've made sure that whoever your abuser is doesn't know where you are, so you've forwarded your mail to a different mailbox, you've made sure you've changed all your passwords to bank accounts you do have access to, and all your online information's been, a lot of social media gets hacked, doesn't it, when you leave a relationship. And we had an example with a client where they changed their Ring doorbell because the Ring doorbell was linked to their ex-partner's phone, so that person could see who was coming and going. And that was really important to do. So there's lots of things that you think about and think, gosh, I forgot to do that, or I forgot to do this. So it's kind of going through a checklist. And we have created a checklist as a group of people that you can download. It's an amazing document. And there's lots of tips in there, and some of the tips that I've just been talking about are in there. So things like the budgeting side of things and just making sure that you don't spend more than you have, and you start to gain control over your money so you feel confident and empowered to kind of move forward And if you're not in work, maybe try and find some work. So look for employment that's going to be, you know, going to work around you and your children if your children go to school. Also, a lot of what I find is a lot of people who are in an abusive relationship, the school don't know that the children are in that situation. So maybe it's about finding about free school dinners, that kind of thing. Gulnaz, did you want to ask me a question?
I did. Okay, quite a lot of times when you're in a relationship, you're married and you're happily married at that moment in time, you make decisions together.
You do.
And sometimes it could also lead to debts. You take out, your partner could take out a loan, or both of you could take out a loan and the partner uses it, and particularly with joint accounts and so on. And when the relationship breaks down, the woman is left with the bulk of the loan or the debt. What does she do? You know, one, in that situation, and secondly, how to even prevent that thing from happening. Because when you're together, you know, you're not really questioning yourself too much. You're making joint plans. You know, you're buying something. You want to do it together, and you're not really suspicious of anything. But if the relationship breaks down and the woman ends up with the bulk of the loan, how do you prevent that thing from happening in the first place?
I think it's a great couple of questions, and I think it's a really difficult one to kind of answer in terms of if you're in a loving and happy relationship. I mean, Jenna's probably sees this from the other side, don't you, Jenna? Ultimately, you know, you have to, if you're married and you're happy and you trust each other, you know, you're going to take out a joint mortgage, aren't you? You're going to go and buy a car in joint names, or whatever that might be. You might have a credit card that you both use. I think some of the signs to look out for is if constantly the debt that you're taking out as a couple is being pushed towards you, like, let's do it in your name, let's do it in your name, you know, that should be like, well, actually, no, because this is an equal partnership, so why aren't we doing it in joint names? And I think if you are left with debt because of a breakdown of a relationship, the very first thing you should be doing is ringing those providers that you have that debt with. So any credit card companies, your mortgage, obviously straight away, any loan companies, to let them know that the relationship has broken down, that you are, you know, part of this debt, that you need to let them know what you can or can't afford to pay, and that the other person has left the house or left the relationship. Often a lot of these lenders do have things in place that they can do to support you. So they will look at ways to support a better repayment method of paying it back. They'll look at sort of restructuring that debt just in your name. It's also very difficult when it's one person, because I've had a situation where my client rang the bank where the mortgage was, and they were literally saying, we can't do anything without his signature, which was ridiculous because he's left and left her in a situation where she's been financially abused. So I kind of tried to get involved a little bit with that. And, you know, so when I work with clients, I am much more of a friend and a confidant that they can come and talk to, and I will guide and support and help them, because no one wants to be in a situation where they just don't know where to turn and they don't know who to ask the question to. And I think as a collective, we have so much experience between us that if one of us has a client that needs that support, we can work together. Me and Jenna have worked together, haven't we, Jenna, on a client, and we're at the point where we might have a happy outcome for that. But you know, that situation was really rather difficult. But by pulling in resources, you know, going to the local food bank and asking them to support the family with food, just whilst they kind of let the dust settle and got themselves in a situation where they could kind of just about keep their head above water. And actually that client I met recently, and she's just about treading water at the minute, even though she's gone out to get herself a job, and one thing and another. Obviously it's confidential, but ultimately her words to me, whether it's only so long I can be this poor, I can be this, literally don't have any spare money to do anything, just can literally just put food on the table. And I think that debt situation can make that incredibly more difficult for people if there's a mortgage in the background and there's loans. And so always speak to the lenders, always ask for their support and how they can help you, whether it's putting you on a payment holiday for a temporary period of time or allowing you to reduce your payments over a longer period. But what you've really got to be mindful of here is the effect on your long-term credit history, which could have been impacted anyway during your relationship anyway. So you could end up with CCJs, bad credit, anything like that could happen. And ultimately, if you have to, you can declare yourself bankrupt and kind of start again. And that's what we're here to help with. We're here to help people understand what they can and can't do, what's the right and wrong thing to do, and then the support that's around them that will help them move through this tough time in their lives and look back and go, I sorted that, I dealt with that, I'm a new person. And we can't stop the bad times. The bad times are going to happen for people in that situation, but there's always a positive outcome. There'll always be a period of time where it's difficult, but you'll see that rainbow and you'll get there at the other side with, with drive and determination, really.
Yeah, just my question now is for Jenna. I'm sorry, it's just because this is something that has happened and a woman had come to me, so I just want to get those for her, hopefully. Jenna, is there any support or any protection? You're a lawyer, so does the law protect these women? Is there anything at all? If somebody is in such a situation where she's left with a loan that her partner took out in her name, and now the relationship has broken down, is there any kind of support?
Yeah, so it probably would depend on a case-by-case basis, because from a legal point of view, I think obviously what Kay said is really helpful from the financial planning side. But from a legal point of view, it would be whether we could argue it was a matrimonial debt or a non-matrimonial debt. So if that loan was taken out for, say, works on the family home where, a conservatory or something done in the bathroom, that's likely to be classed as a matrimonial debt that they'd both likely have to pay off. Whereas if someone's just taken out a loan in the other person's name, but it's more for something for them, there's scope to argue that could be non-matrimonial and try and get at least some reduction on that loan if the wife, for example, or husband was struggling with those payments and it wasn't actually a debt that they had accrued themselves. So it probably depends on a case-by-case basis, really, and the whole context of everything. But that's kind of how it would be treated when we're arguing about it.
I think that's why when I speak to people, it's really important that they contact the lender straight away so that the lender's aware of the situation. So what I wouldn't tell anybody is to bury their head in the sand and hope that it goes away, because it will only get worse. So it's better to kind of hold your hand up and go, right, I'm in this situation. I've been left with X, Y, and Z that I can't afford to repay because the person that's left was the main income earner, for example, in a situation. Or it might actually reverse itself where the person gains more control over their finances now that abuser has left, so is able to do a bit more restructuring of paying that back. But you're right, Jenna, it has to be established whose debt it is. But until that's established, which is obviously later down the line when a client speaks with Jenna and goes for divorce proceedings, for example, or separation of debt, then in the short term, the person left with that debt is going to have to contact them lenders and say, kind of give me a bit of breathing space while we sort things out.
There's also the National Debt Helpline. They're really useful.
Yeah.
I had a client a few months ago with a similar kind of situation, going through a divorce, and she was in a mess, you know, with the finances, and yeah, she'd had loans taken out that she wasn't even aware of. Obviously, that is a completely different story, you know, from a legal perspective. But we got in touch with the National Debt Helpline. They were really, really helpful. They're a free service, and you can do everything online. And they send you budget planners that you can use to kind of, you know, ascertain a budget that you can stick to, and then they'll help you budget what you can feasibly afford to pay off your debts. And then have like a series of letters that'll help negotiate to get the interest stopped on like credit cards and loans, and also to make it so that, you know, it stops it, like you say, Kay, not burying your head in the sand and it moving to that next level. It just is like a really good, helpful service that you can do online, that gives some support to people in that kind of position. And I've used it recently with a client, and they were really good. So just wanted to kind of add that.
That's really good. Thank you. Does it cost quite a lot in terms of consultation if somebody were to just come to you, Jenna? I mean, when I say you, I mean a lawyer or a solicitor. Is it quite expensive? Because somebody who's already in debt, and you know, she then has to pay fees on top of it. Again, it's good to know what it is, because quite a lot of times it may not be too much, but people, you know, the moment you think of lawyers and solicitors, you think, oh my God, we're not even getting into it. So do you have any idea what would it cost? Is there any consultation which is free, or what does it cost?
I mean, I'm always happy to have like a 5-10 minute chat with people, even if, you know, they can't afford it and they just want pointing in the right direction. Or sometimes I've like sent links to forms that people need if they're applying to court but they can't afford the fees, because the fees probably depend again on whether we're resolving it out of court or whether a court application is required. Sometimes when there is domestic abuse and the income and the assets are under a certain threshold, legal aid can be available, but there's got to be evidence of domestic abuse, which sometimes is very, very difficult to prove. Because I was having a chat with a client the other day, and she's a victim, but she doesn't have any evidence. And that's quite common, because when you're in a relationship, you wouldn't necessarily be taking pictures of bruises, or, you know, some things are inside in terms of emotional abuse and psychological abuse. And like Alison's just touched on, sometimes financial abuse can be difficult to prove because there might be loans and things in other people's names that the other person's not known about. But then obviously we're going down the fraud route with that. But you know, sometimes there's abuse going on that you don't actually realize you're a victim till you talk to someone. And it's not, you know, it's not people who aren't intelligent who are going through that. It's people who don't know that they're a victim. It happens quite a lot. So yeah, there is support for some. There's not support for enough people, in my opinion, because you're either legal aid or private paying, and private paying can get quite expensive. So there needs to be a midway ideally, but there's not at the moment. So you know, if I can help someone initially, if I can help someone, even like I've just said, I will do, because there's not enough support out there. Or often if I can't deal with it because we don't have a legal aid service, I will signpost to another local firm in Bolton who do legal aid. So I wouldn't just say, oh, sorry, can't help, because there's always someone that will help you. So, but it's important to, I think, even if you've not got a solicitor, to get court applications in sometimes, even if you're dealing with it yourself, because, you know, that can make a difference, you know, if it's dealt with quickly. But there's not enough financial support really with legal fees. It's either that option, and I think your capital and your income, it's not that high. It's quite a low threshold. So a lot of people are over that when they speak to someone, and they don't really have the option of legal aid.
Yeah, that definitely needs to be reviewed, I think, the legal aid minimum limits, doesn't it, Jenna?
Yeah.
Because, you know, the inflation's been so high, things have grown, property prices, people's earnings. It's just unbelievable that legal aid is at such a low level compared to what house prices are now. So more than often than not, anyone with a home involved is going to fall short of any support from legal aid. And my client fell short of that, but was a stay-at-home housewife and mum, so didn't have any money because everything was in her abuser's name, and therefore couldn't access legal aid of any kind, and now has to pay, her private fees, which is a struggle. But ultimately, if you've got an abusive partner that's not going to go down quietly and isn't going to not fight you for everything, then you're going to need somebody like Jenna in your corner to fight your case. That's just ultimately what you're going to need, aren't you?
Okay, I've got a pretty critical question for all of you, and especially for you, Jenna. As to when you share your situation with third parties. So obviously, if there's a problem with the debt, with the bank or the lender, you talk about the fact you're a victim of abuse. Will one of the first questions they ask you be, have you called in the police? Is that a measure of where someone else actually says, yeah, okay, if you haven't called in the police, we're not going to take you as seriously as if you have? And should you call in the police just for that reason? And what do the police normally do? Can they do anything at all? Do they just make a record of it? Is that an important thing to do?
It's a tricky one because the police, I always say report to the police, because if it's someone, especially in a physical situation, and you're at harm, or especially your children are at risk of harm as well, the first thing you do, really, because solicitors aren't open all the time, is ring the police. And I would always say to anybody who's going through that, who's living with someone like that, to call the police. As Kay mentioned before, there's a lot of good charities as well that you can seek help from. So there's Fort Alice in Bolton, and there's also Endeavour, where I'm a trustee there, and both charities do amazing work with victims. So there's always places like that to reach out to as well. I think if there is a record with the police that dates back, it's sometimes easier to prove domestic abuse than it is if there's no record. But people are very fearful of ringing the police, because obviously you've got to bear in mind that this abuser, if the police don't do anything, they could come back, or they might not put an order in straight away, like a restraining order. So if they didn't do that straight away, or put any bail conditions in place, then there wouldn't be anything to stop the abuser coming back. So I get why people don't ring the police straight away, because there's a fear of, the abuse getting worse. But I think from a legal point of view, that again, it's one of those things where you need to act quite quickly on it, which is when Gulnaz said before, I've given people the forms before, even if they can't afford the advice. So there's 2 forms of injunction which can be applied for, which is a non-molestation order and an occupation order. The non-molestation order stops someone contacting you, usually if the harassing, or the sending messages and ringing and turning up. And the occupation order is to actually exclude that person from the home. So obviously if there's kids involved and they're at risk as well, they can't come within a certain distance of the home. So again, that's why it is important to ring the police sometimes, but I get why people don't, because there's that fear of it's going to make the abuser worse. So it's just, if there's police information, it's sometimes easier to prove. But I don't know the stats, but I would say it's probably one of the least reported crimes because
Right.
the genuine victims don't come forward until it's really a breaking point. And the amount of people I see who they don't have any evidence of it, but I don't doubt what they're saying is true because, you know, I don't think it's not something people just blurt out usually for no reason. There's always a background and a story to people.
I was going to say, I think a lot of that as well, Jenna, is people aren't potentially calling the police in, not just because they're fearful of the police not doing anything and the abuser returning, but fearful of what their future looks like without that person, even though that person might be abusing them. So if that abuser is also the financial abuser, you know, that victim is going to think, well, gosh, if I cut ties here now, where am I going to live? How am I going to survive? And obviously that's why we've created what we've created, to help people go, take that step, be brave. There's things we can do to help you. There's support networks, there's charities, there's people you can turn to for help. But it is a very, very difficult decision to make, isn't it? To go to that complete kind of breaking
It's like
point.
the end game, isn't it? That the end game's at play, and you've kind of admitted to yourself that you can't carry on with it any longer. I see it as well with clients, and it's awful. You know, that the position that people are in, you feel terrible. And yeah, like you say, Jenna, you know, some of the things that people tell you, you couldn't even make that stuff up. You know, it's so bizarre, things that people have done and the abuse that people have had, like mentally, especially. I get that kind of information of clients, and you just think, but it's like you say, proving that, to a court or something, it's very difficult. But yeah, like you say, Kay, I think what we're doing is really good because it kind of just provides that somewhere else, another outlet for people to get some support.
And I think it makes people be brave. So anybody that ends up, anyone that's now watching this recorded version of our webinar, it might just be the catalyst that makes them go, do you know what, I'm going to do it. I know I can speak to Kay, I can speak to Alison, I can reach out to Jenna. I know there's people like us as well in other parts of the country that can help people in these situations. So if we can help anybody break that cycle of abuse and come out of it better, then we've done a brilliant job, haven't we, really?
Yeah.
Kay, you mentioned before sharing an abusive situation with the school, sharing it with an employer. Is that something you think always helps? What kind of reaction do people get when they tell an employer? Is it generally a supportive one?
Absolutely. I think it's the support, because often people will hide that secret from other people in the outside world. So go to work, everything's fine, let's say, drop the kids off at school, everything's fine. But I've seen it in my own children's school, if you like, where that situation has happened. I've not obviously been involved in it, and it's like a weight's been lifted. It's like, the school couldn't do enough. The teachers were checking in on the kids, making sure they were being fed, making sure they had food, checking in on, mum. And I think just having that kind of arm around your feeling of other people know that it's not okay that I'm going through this situation. And then I think the sooner you tell your employer that that's the situation you're going through, then perhaps that employer will have a bit more empathy with you, allow you a little bit more leeway in terms of maybe appointments that you might need to go to arrange things. Meetings with a solicitor, for example, or legal aid, or you might be going to see the bank because you want to sort out the loan situation, go and see an accountant, come and see me. So I think that I'm not saying the more people you tell, the better, but it makes you accountable for it, doesn't it? And then probably with that extra support mechanism around you, you've got a bit more armor to have the strength to go through to the very end. And also people will then be on the lookout, won't they, for abusers driving down the street and trying to see people, and because that happens, doesn't it, Jenny? You know, people who shouldn't be where they shouldn't be are there, and they're in a car and they're seen, and it's like, you shouldn't be on this street. You should, you know, you've got an injunction out on you. And I think if you know that, and also your family, you know, gosh, your family love you so much, and yet so many people who are victims of abuse don't share that with their family because they're embarrassed. But you as the victim should never be embarrassed of anything that happens to you, because it's not your fault. This is the other person's fault that's doing the abusive behaviors, whether it's mentally, physical, or financial. And sometimes it's all of them, isn't it? You know, it could be all of those things that are happening to you, not just one of those things. And I just think that if we can just kind of get that step by step process in place for people, I think more victims will fight the battle, really.
What about sharing with friends? Is that usually
I
useful?
mean, I think so. I mean, I tell my friends when I've had a row with my husband, but you know, if it's much worse than that, you know, sometimes people don't tell their friends for fear of judgment, for fear of them not liking their partner, or not liking, you know, or you might be telling your friends something that's happened because you want them to say you need to leave, or you might be telling your friends because you want them to go, it's not that bad, that happens to me. It's what you're sharing with your friends is really important. And you can adore somebody and love somebody, can't you? But sometimes you need to go, that's not right, that's not okay. Yeah.
Jenna and Kay, we all know that there are charities, and of course we know Fortalis and Endeavour, we work with them, you guys are working with them. But really, when it's financial abuse, how much can they really help? I don't think so. They have the resources to help somebody who's gone through financial abuse, because to my knowledge, they are the ones who will, you know, pull somebody out of a situation where it's a danger to themselves and they have to qualify and so on and meet the thresholds for them to be pulled out of homes. And how can they, do they have provisions in place for financial abuse?
There are a few places. I'm just going to get them up so that I can tell you what they are. But so no one's going to take away that debt. No one's going to get rid of that situation. You know, that's not somebody else's responsibility. Unfortunately, you have to accept you're in that financial situation. But there will be counselling services. There will be people that will help you plan around your future and how you access new products and services that you might need to move forward. Like, you know, I'm sure that most banks have kind of a department now within the bank, don't they, where you can go to for financial abuse, for support from financial abuse. So if you bank with a bank, then the first thing I would be Googling is financial abuse with HSBC, for example, or Royal Bank of Scotland, and they'll have a department that you can contact and tell them that you're going through this situation. Citizens Advice is always a good one because they've got a lot of expertise and knowledge around what you can and can't claim for in terms of short-term benefits, for example, if you need to, if you've had to flee and therefore flee your employment. You know, you might be the one that's fled rather than the one that's left in the marital home. So if you fled, then that's a completely different conversation, I think, isn't it, Jenna? Because then you've got to find a roof over your head for you and your children and emergency money that you can then get. So there is a place where you can get some kind of short-term emergency money to see you through a short time. Financially, it's difficult because you don't always see that it's happened to you. It might not be as simple as debts being accumulated. It just might be spending habits being watched, not being given access to bank accounts, being told you can't spend money on this and you can't do that. Well, that can change with your own beliefs and values. And, you know, some of the coaching that I do with clients around that helps you understand your relationship with money better going forward. Because if you've had a poor relationship with money because of that, you might not be great with money going forward. And that's where we need to kind of re-educate the whole how to deal with your money in a better way, how to make it stretch, how to make it work. But what's really great about some of my clients is when they've got out of that dark hole and then come out of the other side, they then come back to me and then talk to me about, right, I now need to buy my house and I need some help with getting that mortgage, and I need to make sure that I've got life cover for me and my children, and I now need to think about my pension. Because one of the big things with victims of abuse, if they've not been allowed to work, they won't have a pension. So then their long-term future, not only their short-term, but their long-term future has been affected by that. So then it's about playing a bit of catch up in terms of planning and plugging the gaps in the future. So yeah, there's a lot of work around that can be done. Yeah.
So can I just ask one final question about the opposite of having debt, having savings, actually having money?
Yeah, so the difficulty with that is the banking rules, isn't it? It's just pure, you can't add an account holder without the account holder's consent. The same as you can't take yourself off a mortgage just because something. So I think Jenna would probably vouch this. If somebody's got joint savings, and someone's got a savings account in their sole name, but they've both been contributing, there'd be evidence to show that they've both been contributing to say it was joint savings. The danger there is the abuser withdrawing all that money out of that account, taking it away. That's the danger. But that would be what Jenna would obviously then factor into your settlement, wouldn't you, Jenna? You'd factor that in, like, that money's been that deprivation of capital's been moved on purpose. It was there, now it's not. So that needs to come back from somewhere, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, again, it probably depends on, like, every individual is different, but like a lengthy marriage, with what Ray said, although it couldn't be accessed immediately, we'd have to go through a financial disclosure process where we exchange usually what's called a Form E, and lengthy marriages, anything really comes into the pot. So sole name, joint name, all of it, even if someone's never contributed, because, well, Kay knows I'm a big advocate. It can be male and female victims, but often, it is the mum that goes part-time, for example, to look after children. I'm not saying it's every case, it's just usually it is the mum. And sometimes, their finances would be impacted by that. I mean, I'm happily married, but I'm talking myself. The minute I had a son, I went part-time because it's just, that's what you tend to do when you've got young children. So it's vital to get advice from, people like all of us, really, because it might be that on paper I've had someone recently think they've not got a chance of getting anything because most of it's in his sole name, but it's a 25-year marriage and the starting point is sharing 50-50. So obviously it might take a while to get to the point where we're able to distribute that money to that person. But, another form of abuse, really, which is what I was thinking about when Kay was talking, is, sometimes these people someone will come into me and they'll say, oh, he or she's told me that I've no entitlement to anything. Well, that's not true. But when you think about it, that's kind of abuse, making someone think that, because there's case law on it that, if you've looked after the children and the other person's built up their empire, if you will, just because you separate doesn't mean that shouldn't all come into it. So it's probably a case of getting advice from different people at the beginning to get the best chance you can, really, of getting what you're entitled to, which not a lot of people sometimes don't have the courage to do that. And I think people are terrified sometimes when they come in to see me. So, like, first thing I do is offer a brew, because that's what you do up north. And that calms people down. But it's little things like that if people know you're helping, and again, without going into it too much, because I could talk about it all day, but with when you're not married, it's completely different law. So there's no such thing as a common law husband or wife. Your rights are completely different if you're not married. So financially, you've actually got a lot more rights if you're married. Which again, I'm not harping on about reforms today, but cohabitation reforms, it really needs looking at, because people can be living together 30 years and not have the same rights as a married couple who've been married 10, which seems wrong to me. But yeah, it's completely different legislation that, you know, the settlement's determined on.
On the flip side of the bank account, you know, we're talking about having it in a single name. If
Yeah.
you do have joint bank accounts, then if you're a victim of domestic or financial abuse, you can actually ring and freeze those bank accounts to stop the other person emptying the bank account. So that would be something I would recommend, that you actually
Yeah.
freeze your joint bank accounts to stop any
Okay.
money being kind of removed.
Yeah.
I've just been having a quick look online. So quite a lot of the domestic abuse charities have really, really good support. So Refuge, for example, I've got some really good ideas, pretty much what we've put together actually in our brochure. So nothing that we don't already know. And they're on about places like Pay Plan, Citizens Advice, Step Change, and the Money Advice Service. So they're the things that we already kind of recommend, don't we, that people go to.
Yeah.
And they've said everything: check your credit score the same, change PIN numbers to online banking. So I think we've kind of got it sus. We know what we need our victims to do. There just maybe needs to be a step change in what support happens afterwards. Like you've asked, Gulnaz, like where do they go? And what it's saying here is consider talking to a financial expert, you know, so they'd
Yeah.
come to me, they'd go to Alison.
It's making people like yourself more visible and
Accessible, yeah.
So
But I think it also comes down to what Alison was saying before. There's a critical point where a decision has to be made, and it's such a big decision. Are you going to stay in this relationship or leave it? That's the starting point of doing all these things. And maybe you won't do most of them because you haven't made that decision.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but it's having the network that we have to support those victims, and it's happened at least once for myself and Jenna, where we've worked together, haven't we, on the same client in the same situation, and kind of, I would say my part's been played to a certain degree because now it's in Jenna's hands, but then I've come back to the client who's gone, this, I'm not sure of figures, but I think I'm going to be here, so then I need to come see you when I know that, because I need to then plan my future going forward from that. And it's knowing that once you've got to a point where everything's been dealt with and settled, that you can then come back for that financial support for a better financial future, not just kind of, right, my divorce is done, what do I do next?
Yeah, it's like what's
Yeah.
next, isn't it?
The
Yeah.
next step is, right, I now need to speak to my financial advisor, not about the fact that I've been a victim of abuse, but I'm now a survivor of abuse. I now need to plan my future around that.
in cases of women who are running businesses, and sometimes quite successful businesses, and you know, you've got husband-wife team working together and so on, and then there is some financial abuse, or you know, fraud or financial abuse, whatever you call it. What are the steps and how do we prevent that?
Yeah, well, I've actually got a client at the moment who's she's got a lot of property in her name. She met someone, they're not married. So again, Jenna, like you said, completely different legislation around kind of, luckily, I guess for her, probably her properties are probably protected, but she's being really concerned because they have got 2 children together. They've got she's got a number of properties that she rents out, so she's got that income, but it's an abusive relationship that they're in together, and she's wanting to leave. She's already been to see me once. We've given her some advice. We've gone through budgeting, because essentially, again, and like you said, Jenna, I don't like to just use a sweeping brush about this statement, but it does tend to be the woman who's gone part-time, you know, to look after the children. So she had a really good business beforehand. She's scaled that back a little bit, got these properties that she had before she met this person. And yeah, she's really concerned. She was worried about you know, losing the properties and, you know, her not having that income if she was to leave the partner. So we, you know, we've really helped her. We've been in touch. She has already got a legal support. So we've been kind of working with them. And, you know, I've just been trying to plan with her, you know, kind of what the business can look like, how she can get it back, because the children are now at school, but she's had a confidence knocked. You know, it's all about confidence as well, confidence to make that step, confidence to think, yeah, I can, you know, get back into my business full time and push it forward. We've done some forecasting, which has really helped her really like get that like energy back in her, you know, to want to kind of go for it. And like Kay said, it's kind of then taking the emphasis away of like this awful situation and then looking at like, well, what's next for me? Because you know, she might be a mother, she might be a partner to this abusive person, but she's also, you know, her own woman. So she needs to kind of have that empowerment herself to think, actually, this is kind of what I want my life to be like. It's all about for her making sure that there's something in place for the children, because she wants these properties to go to the children. So yeah, you know, it's just like we've said, kind of giving that support to her. You know, she came to me because I'd helped another client who she's friends with who'd had a kind of similar situation. So it's surprising how, you know, we all come across people in these situations, and it's awful that there is obviously an abundance of people, and there's probably so many people out there who just haven't got. It's kind of like you say, we need to make sure that people know about like the services we can offer, and that we are willing to put free time into this, you know. And it's not just something that we're saying, it's actually something that we're happy to back up as well. So,
there's a couple of other things I was just going to mention that I've been thinking about while you were talking as well, Alison. So when you were talking about the business and stuff, so a lot of people will have wills in place, and they'll have wills in place with their partner. So obviously one of the first things you need to be doing once you've got back on your feet is update your will, because if something happens to you and your ex-partner or whoever is named on your will, that's going to be a difficult one to start, you know, to fight. Ultimately, you won't be there to do that. So updating your will is super important. And also any nomination of beneficiary forms that you might have on any pensions that you've got, any workplace pensions, any defined benefit schemes. And one thing that a lot of people really overlook, and Jenna will know about this, is when people get divorced or whatever, and again, the person that's been the stay-at-home mum or dad, or the main child carer, while the other person's either got a flying career or is just earning a really good wage, is actually applying for some of that pension, because that person that stayed at home is essentially given up either a career, a job, or and out of choice, because that's what they wanted to do. But the impact of that is that they won't have as much pension benefits when they get to their retirement age, because they may potentially relying on the partner to support both of them in retirement. So the person who is the victim of the abuse will have to obviously start pension planning again for their future. But also the law says that they can have a portion of their abuser's pension, because actually that was going to be a joint income in retirement. And some of the stats I read is people argue more about who's keeping the dog than who's part of each pension. And you know, it's a massive
I'd argue over my dog.
I would as well.
There you go, dog people.
Okay, that sounds amazing what you just said about being able to apply for your partner's pension. Jenna, is that a huge legal battle to be able to get that kind of decision made?
So you'd have to go through the whole disclosure process, really, and then potentially get expert opinion from what we call an actuary, and get a report, because again, with a lengthy marriage, one of the things we often argue for is to equalise the income of pensions on retirement. So if the other spouse wants the spouse I'm acting for to give up that right, then we'd have to negotiate maybe, you know, a much larger chunk of the capital. But a lot of people, depending on what age they are, you know, especially I'd say 40s upwards, do you want, well, 50s definitely would want a pension share, because you're not going to have enough years working to build that up yourself, really. So yeah, that it's definitely something that, again, it's a case by case thing, but it's definitely something that people can potentially claim against. Again, that's if you're married, so
Yeah.
it's completely different if you're not. But yeah,
Okay.
it's pensions are obviously sometimes more lucrative than people think in terms of what they're worth.
Absolutely.
So,
And I work
yeah.
in the NHS pension space a lot. That's kind of my main background. And I've been doing reports lately for a client who's getting divorced and wants to see the impact of their pension by giving their spouse, you know, a 40% share or a 30% share or a 50% share. And that's just so that he has some form of negotiation when it comes to the settlement of the divorce. So yeah, and my point for bringing it up was that it's often, if you flee or if you leave, it's often overlooked in terms of what actually you're entitled to, and shouldn't be overlooked. And I'm pretty sure anyone that works with Jenna would make sure that that wasn't an opportunity missed to get some capital.
Yeah. Also, Jenna, I think you said enough to have talked yourself into a separate session about cohabitation. So we look forward to that, because obviously that's a completely different situation. Maybe a final question in this section, which has been great. Alison, if you have a husband and wife, or maybe they're not married, but they are jointly running a business and it's not a limited company, so it's a partnership, presumably your advice is always to have a partnership agreement, which I guess is often overlooked when it's husband and wife.
Yeah, I've actually had a partnership, a husband and wife who were in partnership for probably 25 years, running a business, not a limited company. And yeah, they've gone through a divorce. Obviously with a partnership, not as many people set up partnerships now. It's not as common as it used to be. It's more limited companies or sole trader. But with the partnership, it's literally 50-50 split, because that's how the partnerships are set up. It is easier if they're a limited company, because there's a lot more flexibility around. I mean, again, it depends on a one-on-one basis, but with a limited company, there's more kind of it's more set out. There's more legal documents. Usually on a partnership, especially one that's been going for 25 years, it'll just be that they started something together and there's no actual formal documentation. But yeah, it's difficult, especially if they're working in the business together and the business is successful, which the person I had, you know, it was a very successful business, and obviously they'd then kind of fallen out. So it can be really detrimental to the business, you know, because it's like, how if people have, you know, cheated or something like that, how can you then trust them then to, like, you know, you don't want to live with them, you don't want to be married to them anymore, so why would you then want to work with them every day? So these things can obviously have a massive impact, again, on financial planning. All of a sudden, you know, you've not got this business that you've invested all your time in. So it can be really difficult, you know, to kind of take that separation. The business I worked with, they ended up, well, one of them left the business. That was kind of, you know, it was inevitable really at the end. But yeah, it can be quite complex really, and, you know, again, a legal kind of conversation as well, dependent on the individual.
Okay, right. Well, thanks everyone. That was a fantastic discussion.